Hello people of YouTube, it's Deepak here, and welcome to DCS World 2.7.6 and Deca Ironworks Simulations JF-17 Thunder Module. Welcome to Tutorial 7, Air-to-Ground Radar Modes. We've already covered in previous tutorials the within visual range and beyond visual range air-to-air modes of the radar. That's the KJL-7 radar that we have in the JF-17. Today we're going to cover the various modes that the radar has in air-to-ground mode. There's quite a few of those, and they can also slave the WMD targeting pod to their sensor points of interest, and I'll demonstrate how to do that today as well. So, first thing is first, we're going to pop the aircraft into air-to-ground mode by pushing T1 switch aft. That sets the aircraft up for operating with the radar and employ air-to-ground weapons. It also by default displays the radar in the center multifunction display and makes it the sensor of interest. If it's not the sensor of interest, you can set it using the S1 sensor select switch. If I push that switch aft, with the center display already selected, it will actually make the HUD sensor of interest. The HUD is a sensor that can be used in air-to-ground mode. It can't be used in air-to-air. And you'll see that while I've got the HUD designated, I've got this diamond that I can move using the T5 or TDC key. If I press sensor select switch aft again, I will then have made the center display sensor of interest, as demonstrated with this asterisk. If I push S1 left, it'll be the left display that's sensor of interest. If I push it right, it's the right display. And then aft gives me the HUD, aft again gives me the center display. Let's focus down on the radar, on the center display now, and I'll very quickly go over the modes that we're going to be demonstrating today. You access the different modes of the radar using this push button at the top left that currently says Map. Map is the mode we're currently in. If I push that, you'll see listed all the way down the left and right hand side of the radar all the different air-to-ground modes. Now, if we were in navigation mode, all of the modes would be listed in this view. That would be air-to-air and air-to-ground modes. But because we're in air-to-ground mode, we only see the air-to-ground modes. So, in short, map mode simply gives you returns from the ground and displays an image somewhat like this, which represents the terrain in front of the aircraft. If I go to F10 view and zoom out a little bit, you'll see we're here, we're facing this way, this is the terrain I'm looking at. This is actually a kind of outcropping in Cyprus, and if I go back into the cockpit, you'll see there it is. Looks just like it did on the map. So this is really useful for designating points on the ground or buildings or other kinds of static objects, and it has a variety of beam sharpening modes which will allow you to actually effectively zoom in the image and even enhance that image, so you can get very detailed views of the ground and other static objects. Our sub mode here is RBM, that's regular beam mode. There are a bunch of other modes that you can use, like I said, to get more detail. We then have GMTI, that's Ground Moving Target Indicator mode. This is used for vehicles, generally, on the ground, which are moving, and it will display the same view as in mapping mode, but additionally it will identify moving vehicles using Doppler shift and display bricks, just like you have in range while scan air-to-air mode. So it will actually display bricks over the radar display for moving vehicles. You then have the first of two C modes, C1. This is used for static or very slow moving ships, and just like GMTI, it will display bricks for those identified targets. And then C2 mode is pretty much the same, the difference being it is tuned for higher speed targets, higher speed ships. Beacon mode is currently not implemented. WA mode, that's weather avoidance, that's a weather radar mode, currently not implemented, but I believe it is coming in the future now that we have the new cloud model. And then you have TA for terrain avoidance mode. This is implemented, and it gives you kind of a terrain awareness, terrain avoidance mode for the radar. You can't designate targets in TA mode, but if you're flying low level or in poor weather, it gives you very good awareness of the terrain around you and helps you from flying into it, basically. So let's go back to mapping mode. This is the first mode we're going to go over today, and I will demonstrate the controls around the outside of the display. We'll then talk about the display itself. So yeah, like I said before, we're in regular beam mode. We can also stand by the radar here. We can silence the radar here. We can access the controls. Currently the only thing we can do is declutter the display in the controls. We have the current radar range here. It's set to 40 nautical miles. Let's bump that down to 20 for now. We'll get a more usable picture. We can freeze the image. This image is actually being scanned and updated constantly. If we want to freeze the image for a moment to analyze it carefully without fear of things changing or moving, we can freeze it. While it's frozen, the radar is actually continuing to operate and emit as normal. We're simply displaying effectively a screenshot of the last radar return. And if I take off freeze, it returns to normal. You then have the mode in which the antenna of the radar will operate. Slave mode means the antenna will always be pointing at your currently designated sensor point of interest, or SPI. By default, that's the current waypoint. We have here 1 in a circle. That's the currently selected waypoint. Right now, the antenna is slaved to that waypoint. If I was to, say, reduce the azimuth scan down to 30 degrees, it would be 30 degrees centered on that point, no matter what I do with the radar cursor. And I move the radar cursor, by the way, using the T5 switch, which is the TDC. If I switch from slave to snowplow, now the radar antenna is actually following my cursor. And you can see that as I move the cursor around, the radar is scanning the area around my radar cursor. If I put it back to slave mode, and also I'll return the radar back to 60 degrees of scan, and we'll get the full scan again. Down here we have the speed gate. You've got low and high. This is actually mainly used for the modes of the radar that display bricks for moving targets. It's really about, is the target you're trying to track a slow-moving target or a high-speed moving target. Bottom left here we have the gain. We can adjust the gain here to get a brighter or dimmer picture and to try and tease out the details of the radar returns that we're seeing. And then we have the azimuth scan, as I mentioned before. Defaults to 60 degrees. You can bump that down to 15 degrees or even 30 degrees. And that just adjusts the scan volume. Now, of course, if you're working with a very specific target, you're generally going to want to have as small an azimuth scan as possible, because that's going to give you a faster refresh. Okay, so we currently don't have a sensor point of interest designated. We just have the current waypoint. Let's go ahead and push S2 switch. Sorry, S2 switch. That's the sensor control switch left, and we will be in expanded mode. So what we're now going to get is we're going to get a zoomed in view of the area of our sensor point of interest. Now you can see it's the same resolution as the main screen, so it's pretty fuzzy. It's not particularly detailed, but it is zoomed in, and it will help us choose a point. Now I know that there's an airbase somewhere around about here, so I'm going to put my cursor over that, and I'm going to depress. Oh, I'm going to try that again. There we go. For some reason it jumped. And I'm then going to press sensor control switch left again. The radar actually updated the screen there based on my designation. If I press it again, I get DBS1 mode. Now DBS1 mode is Doppler beam sharpening mode number 1. Now, one issue is that DBS mode doesn't work directly in front of the aircraft. You'll see that I actually have this cut-off area here and here. You can't do DBS immediately in front of the aircraft, but you can do it just left and right of the nose. So I might need to actually maneuver the aircraft in order to take a little look at this area that I want to scan. So let's do that quickly. We'll come out of active pause. We'll go ahead and maneuver to the right, and we should then be able to get a better scan of the area that I'm interested in. Okay, we're going to let it roll out about here. And I'm going to put it back into the autopilot. There we go. That's nice. And now, if we jump back to the center display, you will see that all of a sudden we've picked up a bunch of detail now on that area. Let's pop it back into active pause so that we can sit here and have a good look at this. I could now refine my targeting. I actually want to target the start of the runway. So I'm going to move my cursor about here. I'm going to depress, and then I'm going to press sensor control switch to the left again, and that puts us into DBS2. Now DBS2 is the highest magnification and highest quality mode that the radar provides. It takes quite a long time to do the scan. You'll see there that it's really slowly populating that area, but now we have a really high resolution display of this target area, and we can quite clearly see that this is an airbase, and we can even see individual hangars and buildings and all kinds of stuff. So let's say that I want to figure out what it is I'm looking at here and sort of visually identify that target. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to point my cursor here at this ramp here, and I'm going to depress. You'll see the cursor always jumps to the middle after you depress. That's because it'll do a new scan and it will center the area that you've designated. On my right multifunction display, I'm going to go Menu, Pod, bring up my WMD7, turn it on, uncage it. By default it's in snowplow, so it's looking forward. Let's switch that. Where's the button again? Here we are, SP. Going to switch it into slaved mode. It's now pointing directly at the place that I've designated here. I'm going to press S1 switch to the right to designate this. I'm going to do S2 switch in, and that gives me the narrower field of view. I'm going to go ahead and zoom. And there we go. That is the apron that I have targeted using my radar. So if we kind of visually confirm that that is the target we want, we are now ready to go. And that's our currently designated sensor point of interest. And then if I look up here on the HUD, I can see the circle with the dot is where my targeting pod is currently looking. The diamond is my current target, and it's got the arrow pointing off the side because it's actually over here outside of the field of view of the radar. And that is how you use mapping mode to designate static things on the ground. Very, very useful mode of the radar. Next, we're going to take a little look at GMTI for moving ground targets. Okay, so moving on, let's grab GMTI mode. If we press Map here at the top left and select GMTI, we've reset to what looks like the normal the normal map mode of the radar. I'm going to reduce my range here down to 20 nautical miles. Actually, maybe even go for 10. That's going to give us quite a nicely focused view here. I'm going to go ahead and reduce the azimuth scan, and you'll see that we've picked up a brick here. There's a flashing brick. I actually need to press S1 switch aft to make sure that I actually have the radar cursor active again. And yeah, like I said, you can see there's a brick here. I'm going to go ahead and move my cursor over it and depress. The radar should now have locked up that moving target. Once again, I can move to the WMD, and it should be possible to go back to snowplow and then back to slave, and you see, yep, there is a moving vehicle. That's what the radar picked up. Going to have another go at targeting that. There we go. Now we have a circle. The circle with the lines indicates that we've achieved a correct lock on that moving vehicle in GMTI mode. And by looking at the targeting pod, we can confirm, yes indeed, that is the thing that I'm looking for. I'm actually going to go ahead and zoom this a little bit. I'm going to press S1 switch to the right, so I'm using the pod again. I'm going to zoom it in all the way, and I'm also going to switch from CCD to infrared. And using that mode, it's very clear to me that yes, that is indeed a moving vehicle that we've picked up with the radar. The radar will continue to track that automatically, and in combination with the targeting pod, I can make sure that yes, indeed, we are looking at the correct thing. Once again, looking up on the HUD, we have all the standard targeting information, the range, altitude, closure rate. It's 28 degrees to the left of the nose of my aircraft, and 16 seconds to overfly that target. So that is pretty much it with GMTI. A very, very simple mode and a really easy way of picking up moving targets. You can imagine if I was having to lock that up using my targeting pod, I might have a slightly harder time. Whereas on the radar, you know, because of Doppler shift, the radar is very, very quickly and immediately able to figure out, yes, this is something that's moving relative to its background. Oh, and it's something that I forgot to mention on the previous one. S2 switch, you know, the sensor control switch, if I depress that when I'm radar sensor of interest, that's always going to unlock the target. And that's me back to normal now. Cool. Let's go to the next mode. We now have C1. Let's select C1 mode. Again, it resets the radar. It goes back into a mode that looks very much like map mode. Let's bump that range down again. And we're looking once again for bricks. Now, I know that I actually have 2 ships out here. I've got one around about here, and there we go, we've got a brick, we have a good return, and there's one over here, and I set them to move at different speeds. So with C1 mode, I'm picking up this one, which I believe is a larger, slower moving vessel. That one's coming up just fine. I'm going to depress on it, and straight away, I've got the circle. It has locked. Well, actually, that's the smaller, faster moving one, bizarrely. And using my targeting pod, I can confirm, yeah, it's looking at the right thing. And the thing is, the targeting pod will focus on the target once every time the radar scans. So you'll see that it does actually kind of lag a little bit. I can improve that by changing the mode that the radar is operating in. I'm going to put it into snowplow, and I'm going to reduce my azimuth of scan quite a bit. And I'm going to go ahead and lock up that target again if I can. Come on. Get me a good... There we go. Got a good return. And now you'll see it's jumping far more regularly. So the target information is way more up to date. And that's pretty much how C1 mode works. If I jump to C2... It actually retained the lock on that ship, which is impressive. I didn't know it could do that. Let's depress S2 and drop that lock for now. Let's bring the range all the way down again, and I should have a ship over here as well. And this is the slower moving one, in fact. So once again... Oh, there we go. We got the brick. And there we go. There we go. I've got the lock on that ship. So in C2 mode, I've managed to lock this one up, bizarrely. I'm going to go sensor select switch to the right, and I'm going to zoom out a bit there. And we can confirm, yep, this is a larger, slower moving vessel that we've picked up. That is indeed the target that I'm looking for. We've got a really good image on that there. So once again, using the radar, we can very quickly figure out moving ships and moving vehicles, and then get our targeting pod pointed at them to confirm that they are indeed what we're wanting to target. Next mode we're going to take a look at is TA, and that is in fact the final mode that we have available to us. Now, in order to demonstrate TA mode, let me drop that target. I don't know why it's still holding the target there. That's better. In order to demonstrate TA mode, I'm going to have to fly a bit closer to the ground. And actually what I'll do is I will swap the radar onto this display here, because that will make it more in our field of view. So I can have a little look at the HUD and that display at the same time. That's better. Okay, so to get a proper indication of how this works, let's get the speed up, let's get the altitude down, and let's fly towards some nasty terrain. Now, a couple of things to note here. Again, we've got the azimuth of scan that we can adjust. We've got the maximum range, which is stuck at 10. If we go to control, I'll quickly active pause this. If I go to control, I can set what I want my minimum altitude to be, and that will control the color coding. So for now, let's leave it at the default of 100, but you have options to go up to 300 and to go down to 0 or 50. I'm going to leave it at 100 for now. And you're going to see that terrain will start to be displayed in amber and in red, depending upon its relationship to that set altitude, which, just to remind you, I've set at 100. So, let's see what we get here. Going to get nice and low. And there is some rising terrain up ahead, so this is going to... Oh, there we go, we're starting to get amber. So amber is everything within 200 feet of our set altitude. So we set 100, that means that amber is anything between 100 and 300 feet from our current altitude. Red is everything below that. So we can see the rising terrain up ahead. It has quite a... Oh, we're getting a pull-up indication. It has quite a small amber band, and then it goes straight to red. That tells us this rising terrain is quite steep, and we should be careful about that. Let's maneuver around to the right here. And see what we get here. Yeah, for some reason, it's scanning in a really strange way here. It's very much fixated to the right. Let me see. I've selected my right display, and I'll put the angle at 30, and I'll set this to snowplow. Yeah, it's behaving strangely. Let's reset it by going to map, and then going back to TA. I don't think that is the way it's supposed to work. There we go. That's it. It's recentered. That would be a bug. So one thing to note, if you've been in another mode first, especially one that involves locking a target, you might want to flip. You might want to make sure you've unlocked that target, flip away, and then flip back. Now, something to note as well is, of course, the radar is only going to pick up the highest terrain in front of you. So if you have high terrain in front, everything behind that will show as red. Even though I know this mountain is actually not very deep, everything beyond it is showing as red because the radar has no field of view. Let's come around to the right. If we were flying in low visibility, we could maneuver around and wait until we saw some differently coloured terrain to figure out, right, where is our route out of this area, away from the high terrain. And there we go, we're starting to pick up a gap. So yeah, I now know that if I maneuver to the right, I have a gap in that high terrain, continue onwards, and wait for the scan to update. Yep, that's much better. I can now see that I have a path through this high terrain, and I could use the radar to navigate through that in low visibility conditions. Luckily today I can, in fact, see where I'm going. So that is all of the air-to-ground modes of the radar in the JF-17. Just to very quickly summarise once again, we have map mode, which will just display static terrain and objects, GMTI, which will overlay moving vehicles, C mode 1, which will overlay slowly moving vehicles, C mode 2, which will overlay fast moving vehicles, beacon is not implemented, weather awareness is not implemented, terrain awareness is used for flying low level or in conditions where visibility is poor. So, I hope that you all enjoyed that. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like, and comment, and I'll see you all next time.